clear you're under attack. It's clear you're under attack, but investigations are ongoing to determine the threat. Providence's incident response plan outlines that detection and containment measures should be deployed as a cautionary measure. If the suspected breach escalates to your operations network, technicians could be locked out of their key systems, controls, and prevented from monitoring fuel supplies. However, shutting down both your business and operation network will prevent Providence from performing key business functions. So, as you guys all think about this, how detrimental it would be if all of your systems went down? And do you have to think about how can you recover? Quick question, can you recover all your systems at one time? Probably not. Maybe some people may say yes, but I've never seen that happen. So one of the things to keep in mind is that when you're looking at scenarios like this, you also have to make a decision. What are your top priorities? And what I have found is when you're kind of doing disaster recovery, business continuity, incident response, I mean, you have to get leadership involved. So, for example, ransomware, is there anyone in the room that could write a $24 million check? Probably not. So, yeah. I mean, we're going to provide, our job is to provide data to leadership to determine should we be ransomware or not. So, we'll kind of go through all of this as we do that. So, this is where you guys get involved. So, what I just read is here on the side of the page. So I'm going to go ahead and hit vote now. And you should, on your phones, you should see these options. And it's going to tell me how many people have voted. So I want to try to get 80% of the room if possible. So you can choose what you think you should do. And so what I'm going to tell you with the responses, none of these are necessarily wrong, but what we're looking for is the best response. Sometimes what I've seen is we go from A to Z and we forget to do everything in between. So this is what, as we start to reveal options, we'll kind of talk about what that looks like, and then we're going to open discussion why people chose what they chose. I'll let a few more people vote, and then we can reveal the options. Did everyone vote that wanted to vote? All right. So it looks like we had about 6% with option 1, 6% with option 2. And we had 19% for option 3 and 69% for option 4. So based on how you answered, would you be willing to share why you answered how you answered? I know it's early. I do need to get everyone coffee.
No, we have it available.
I know. And it's very
Mm. I would shut down everything.
I shut down. I said shut down.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So did I.
Because I don't know if it's, I mean, you can shut down affected computers, but if it's spread further than that, like I think every minute counts at this point if you know that there's something definitely wrong.
Go ahead.
So I kind of concur with Brian. One, just based upon the data and the injects, is that it's primarily business network orientation. It's also like mid-afternoon on Friday, so if we're worried about accessing customer data, we're worried about billing systems, it may not be that critical processing period for these systems or these processes supported by these application systems to be conducted. So just only on the inject might not be that difficult for us to shut down systems leading into the weekend and give our teams some time to change.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you're going to see as we build this, we're going to get more information. But if you think about if you're actually responding to a breach or ransomware or whatever that is, you're gathering information through. So sometimes you'll make different decisions based on more evidence. Go ahead in the back.
I went with option 4. On one reason. Typically, I think this type of you may suspect we have a meeting. Right now, we know it's attack. It's have a problem. You know what the problem is on. You know what that's going to problem is, and it's going to require response. So, heavy handed all the way to very important business attack.
So how this works is generally I will pick the majority of the answer and then we'll talk about whether that's a poor answer or an excellent answer, and then we'll talk a little bit why.
I also mentioned something.
Sure.
In a lot of cases, like I work in a hospital, we have so many sister systems that are attached to us that it cuts both ways. If we're infected, we've got a pipeline into another system, we could be infecting them just as well. They're infected, they could be infecting us. A lot of times, in fact, what we've done in the past is we just severed that relationship until we can ascertain if it's our side or their side or where it actually came.
And what you'll notice, I mean, obviously, the pipeline is different from a hospital from a university. So I did this last fall, and we had someone from just about every industry. And we actually had someone from Ohio State, and Ohio State absolutely not paid ransomware. So how they responded was very different than the rest of the group. So it's this is intended mostly to bring one organization in to practice the tabletop. So I think what we'll see through here is you're going to respond probably more based on your organization, which totally makes sense, and it's fine to do that. So just keep that in mind that if this says that this is a poor answer, a good answer, this may not be how you would do this, at your organization. And what I like about this exercise is, as you can see, it's already created a bunch of communication. And the number one thing I think when you're dealing with cyber attacks, ransomware, if everyone's not on the same page, it makes it really difficult to really do some things. And there's some new regulations that are coming out. I think you might know about DORA. Have you heard of DORA? So it's a new regulation coming out of Europe, and it's way worse than GDPR. They're asking.
It is.
It's not final. It's 2025, and I actually just found out because I'm looking at this right now. They're saying you have to report and notify everyone within 26 hours. I mean, that's insane, but we'll see how that all works out. But it's really crazy, and it's DORAM if you have clients all over. I'm old. I'm not used to using everything else, so that's why I'm like fumbling because I'm like my external mouse isn't working very well. All right, so basically, number 4, how they classified this situation was a weak answer. And basically, at this stage of the incident, you're only aware of an attack on corporate IT systems, but shutting off that section of your network, you can continue transporting energy resources. So I think we talked a little bit about that in the answers as well. And then what you notice is these can be customized, but what this is again, looks at your stock price and the way you define your answer. It'll show that your stock price can go down or up. And these graphs will kind of move throughout the exercise. It also talks about operational capacity and return to operations as well. Does anyone have any questions on that? So we're going to go to the next one. So your attempt to contain the threat proves ineffective, running your corporate IT network useless. Additionally, without the capacity to monitor and invoice product supply in light of the attack, your operations network cannot continue to operate without incurring a devastating financial loss. It transpires that you're being attacked by a threat group called DarkSide, which operates using a model-dubbed ransomware as a service. Messages are appearing on computer desktops throughout your network with the message, "Welcome to DarkSide." Your files are encrypted, open, read, the README text file and follow instructions. DarkSide has also sent you an information pack outlining which of your computers and servers have been affected. Isn't that kind of a scary thought where you're someone from the outside having all that information? The issue has escalated from a major incident to a crisis, and the appropriate authorities have been briefed on the situation. The FBI has deployed support to assist in recovering operations. You're still unsure if the individual systems are safe to turn back on. With the corporate IT systems down, Providence's most pressing concern is the automated billing system. With this offline, you have no way of tracking any customer transactions. So what do you do? So this is a pretty one, you either pay the ransom or not. How many of your, in the audience, how many of your the organizations you work are not allowed to pay ransomware? So do you think that could ever change? If a company is bleeding millions of dollars every day, do you think they might reconsider paying the ransomware?
Publicly, we say we won't pay.
Right.
Yeah, reality is we would call it a pretty dark.
Depends on if you have insurance.
So I don't know, this is kind of an interesting, so Aon and Lloyd's of London now are saying we do not pay ransomware if it's from patient state. So if you're helping organizations look at ransomware insurance, you should really think about what they're asking. I mean, what do most insurances? Force majeure, act of God, act of war. So after 9/11, North Korea, China, and the Soviet bloc, those fall under those where technically they could say it's an act of war because that was computer hacking became an act of terrorism after 9/11. So it's very interesting for sure. And I'll wait for people to respond. And so again, try to remember to answer it based on this scenario, not necessarily what you do for your company. But it's fine either way, but that'll kind of give us a better indication of how we handle the incident better. Minute here to let people go.
Connie, this is really interesting. Instead of just having an open-ended discussion, forcing specific decisions, which we have to discuss once every day, right?
Yeah.
Really powerful response.
Yeah, and honestly, what I like the most, I actually have been doing this for C-suites, board of directors for very large companies. And the C-suite absolutely loves this because if you think about it in the room, many times there's certain people that'll overtake the conversation. And this way it allows everyone to have a voice in the voting. And really what comes out of it is, are we prepared? And then some of my clients are using this particular process and they're including it when they're meeting with their cyber insurance for renewals. They're including the results because on the back end, there's a bunch of results we can show how we've improved or not improved. And some of the ransomware questions. Have any of you done any of the questionnaires for cyber insurance lately? Mm-hmm. They have changed so much in the last year. It's painful because it's not about just checking yes or no. You're actually having to validate. But interesting facts, for every dollar that they're collecting, they're paying out $1.52 more. Any economics mathematical, that is not a winning formula. I mean, you can't pay more than what you're making. So I think we're going to continue to see a ton of changes there. Okay. So obviously we had 12% on option 1 and 88% on the second one. Does anyone, and again, this is not shaming, does anyone want to say why they chose option 1? Chose those as an option.
And you to say, you don't have the backups, so you can't recover.
And it's amazing in 2022. I actually used to work with a credit union, and their CEO used to take their backups. Same. I mean, that's obviously like a big no-no, but anymore, is it?
Well, that's what we're dealing with, is that we have all this, replication and near real-time replication, and it's all working great. It's a normal day-to-day high availability. We're solid as gold. When it comes to this, though, is we did away with all of our taking our tapes off, offline to Iron Mountain or wherever, and we're having to spend money to bring that back in.
Yeah, and it's getting really interesting too, because there used to be, because I know the federal government is trying to push American companies not to be ransomware. But I personally think of a big company like a Cardinal or Nationwide Danger company, if they're bleeding money, they're going to do what they have to do.
Yep.
They're not, they'll look for that. And I'm not certain it says, but it's about business and about risk and how you handle those things. But what I'm starting to see, and after you made sense too, now they're like, it's up to quadruple extortion. So if you don't pay the ransomware, they move to the second. You don't do that, they move to the third, to the fourth. And at what point, and some of that is if they have customer data or private information, they'll start sending out emails to your customers. It's crazy, some of the stuff that's been seen. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and choose option 2 since the majority of you did that. So great, really how this looked at is a great answer. And as you can see on the graphs, you can see how that's moving based on our responses. So whether you hit the ransomware is most critical decisions made during a ransomware incident. Dark Side is a professional ransomware outlet. So again, I think most companies, if they're allowed to, they may do it based on revenue. Anybody have any questions on that so far? So now we're going to talk about supply chain implications. Through some data backups, though some data backups are available to facilitate restoration, many critical backups kept on your compromised closed storage are unavailable. You have contracted with a third-party security firm to work with government officials to retrieve all of these data accesses. So a quick question, how many of you have someone on the container, like a Mandiant or Verizon, if you have a breach or some type of incident that you bring in? I feel like that's becoming more and more common because I remember I've been doing this for 18 years. Like I feel like we have one incident or two incidents a year. Now I feel like it's every day there's something going on. So it continues to change. The other thing I'm starting to see people do is Bitcoin. I have several of my big clients that purchase Bitcoin when it's down because they're not going to accept a check, obviously, because it's traceable. So Bitcoin is probably the number one reason of how people came on ransomware.
What's the percentage of ransomware paid, a paid situation where they unlock everything?
It's kind of hard to say because some people don't have to report. So the numbers, and it's ransomware's been around for a while, but I feel like it's been the last 2 years that kind of aligned with it. I feel like there are some people that haven't paid it, bigger ones that they that I've seen. Because you've seen any different apps on that.
In terms of percentages.
Yeah.
The biggest reason people won't share.
Mhm.
Another question, what's the age range? If you get a ransomware attack, we all get basis. It's $85,000. We all know that that's a scam. Some companies have under $100,000 short of payments, just the cost of the business. But what kind of curious to find out what it's anonymous.
Yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot of statistics yet. I think we're starting to gather those. Because generally when it's over a certain threshold, especially if you're sending it out of the country, the FBI has to be part of it because if you're paying out in certain countries, it's actually against the law of the United States. So a lot of that is nation state countries, but I think there's like 26, or there's a lot that I was so kind of surprised, and I don't know all of them by heart, but so that's why I think in the next couple of years, what might be an interesting talk, Nancy, is I have some connections local FBI agents. So that might be a good guest to bring in just to kind of talk about what they're seeing, because, you know, they do publish some of their stuff, but a lot of times, I don't have any of you heard of InfoGuard?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's kind of, you know, run by the FBI, but it's for all of us to collaborate and share information. But the problem is not everyone shares information. So statistically, even the Verizon Risk Report is an amazing resource, but it's not, it's like only a small set of companies. So that it's based on, you know, maybe several hundreds, but that's not all companies. And so I think statistically, when we look at stuff, it's kind of relative to the data points that they're collecting. And not to say that there's not great information, there's absolutely, but just keep in mind, it's not like there's nothing like 100%. There's no way to interview or collect data.
Hey, Connie, just take this with a grain of salt, I just looked it up. And the security source CloudWorks, 32% ransomware victims paid the ransom in 2021, 65% recovered. Everything. Again, take all that with a grain of salt. Statistics
Yeah.
can be skewed.
And I think part of the problem is that if you pay the ransomware, I mean, they're criminals. So if you pay it really quick, they pick it again. And again, I don't know if there's a ton of it, that there has been a few. So it's beyond just paying the ransomware. It's also like, how is it going to impact your business? And even if you pay it, who knows if the data hasn't been modified or printed. That's why we have like security products. I think the average corporate environment has 75 plus security tools, and that's a lot. So just kind of keeping all of that in mind. So in the meantime, you have multiple problems to juggle with both your corporate and industrial networks practically inoperable. You have no way of moving oil along the pipeline to dependent resellers or monitoring supply to correctly invoice customers. Did you guys all see the videos for gas, plastic, garbage bags?
Oh, yeah, that was
And your truck
insane.
company.
Whoa.
Yeah. Accepting more oil from suppliers is becoming impossible. They are having difficulty finding contingency plans for adequate storage, which is domino effect means barrels of gas, diesel, and jet fuel are stranded in the Gulf Coast. The product needs to keep moving, or your risk is today, or your risk is reducing in quality. Secondly, retailers and industrial customers use this oil to feed business critical infrastructure such as Atlanta Airport, manufacturing facilities, and highway gas stations. There are several knock-on effects that would alarm the public if this issue isn't remediated. Ground flights down, factory machinery, oil spills, restricted transportation of supplies, and the ability to fuel police, military, and ambulance vehicles. Dependent members of your supply chain must be informed of the situations as it develops how we'll begin this communication. So this tabletop is actually designed for leadership, not tech, because you're seeing we're not getting into a lot of the technology. So one of the things that I think for consideration is we all know what happened. Toilet paper during COVID, can you imagine if no one could get gas? And that's why you saw gas plastic bags. So it becomes almost a national emergency, because obviously we can't fuel our military, we can't fuel things in hospitals and things like that. It can become problematic. And I think there's 4 options on this, but that's why we have to play it on the phone so that I can see the other options as well.
A lot easier to decide you're on a phone like this.
Yeah. Well, and again, like it is, there's no bad outcome for this. But can you guys see how this would create a really good conversation with your companies and something like this was to happen? And I personally told really the biggest problem is to break down one of the issues and what people need to know what they're supposed to do. I know we were talking earlier this morning. You know, your plans have to be actionable. If it's 1,000 pages, who the heck is going to have time to look at 1,000 pages in a crisis? And do we make the best decisions we're in crisis mode? Probably not. I mean, some people say that they do better, but I just think it's like full panic mode, and sometimes you just don't have a lot of time to think about stuff. And I don't know, I mean, I come from a cybersecurity perspective, but I can say in my experience, ransomware has been the #1 thing to create a better relationship between business and technology. I personally feel it's always a people process technology problem. If you could have all the processes in the world, if no one's following, it doesn't matter. And the technology is an enabler, and if technology is configured correctly, what happens? Bad things. But people are part of that whole entire life cycle as well. So all right, so it looks like option 1 was 33, option 2, 50, option 3, 6, option 4, 11%. Does anyone want to talk about why they chose these options?
It gave as little information as humanly possible. Like option 3, we're saying it's under control. No. Contingency, we'll be looking at other transportation methods. I don't even want to disclose anything like that. And then the last one, I forget what the last one was. Again, it was a what is it? Oh, we're undergoing maintenance to restore services, and we'll update you. I don't even want to give them a, hey, this is what's going to happen next.
Yeah,
So,
you gotta be truthful. Can't lie.
right.
You lie, you're dead. You're just done.
And what's interesting, if you guys remember the Target breach, Target tried to do the right thing and just come out, but if you remember the story, it kept changing.
Mhm.
So they weren't being dishonest for people, so they were, because it kept changing. So it's a balance of trying to figure out. And I agree with what you're both saying, but it's that's what's hard about it is it's not just within your laws a lot of times.
Yeah.
So it gets a little crazy.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Just about kind of the second one. I mean, can you do that with the I mean, I feel like you could combine apologies or like I feel like you could combine apologizing with having a contingency, or apologize and talk about delaying if you want to give some additional information, right? Like it seems it doesn't seem like it's in direct conflict with some of those, except for the third one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like this is trying to guide you to what you should do first. But as we all know, like, you're going to have legal, marketing, operations, you're going to have the C-suite involved, especially if there's money on the table. So a lot of these conversations do happen, at the same time, but some of them, first the C-suite to make a decision, they're going to have to find out quite a bit of information so they can make a good business decision. And really, as security and risk people, our job is to let them know what that is, and they ultimately have to make the decision. Unfortunately, and sometimes they make the decision we're not always happy with, but they understand the business very well and know what the impact will be. All right, so great answer. The oil transportation, and I picked one that we had a majority. Industry is an integral part of the national infrastructure and also part of the complex ecosystem. So again, this is kind of where they feel like based on this event, that's kind of what we did. So risk assessment, processes to secure the 100 gigabyte cache of compromised data are ongoing. The FBI is now supporting the process with services to take the compromised cloud storage offline and prevent further organizational damage. Once recovered, data backup should provide a key utility in returning to operations. The attack vector has also been identified. It appears the threat actor penetrated a subsidiary natural gas compression facility and pivoted a Providence Pipeline's business network, deploying ransomware on those systems. So I think we were talking about this with the hospitals because the pipe is going and you're connected to so many different organizations. And hence why third-party risk management is so important, because so many of these things happen with smaller subsidy, but they're connected into your network. So just, thinking, I know I'm preaching to the choir to this group, but why these conversations are really important. The attack vector has also been identified. It appears the threat actor penetrated I already talked about that part. So our capacity to accept oil for transportation has ground to a halt, but with suppliers now sitting on tankers full of fuel. Can anyone see why tanks full of fuel, sitting for hours or days, kind of a dangerous thing?
Oh, yes.
Legal also has noted that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has been made aware of the incident through communications with other governmental departments. Going forward, it remains critical to report to CISA directly. Failing to officially report in an accurate and timely manner may incur serious regulatory compliances. Our increasing reliance on alternative supply methods in accordance with relevant regulations needs to be assessed for potential risks. With the implementation of more complicated logistics, which of the following poses the biggest potential risks to the organization? So going through this exercise, do you see how this, I mean, do you feel like this is a valuable lesson of just having this conversation and talking?
Mhm.
I don't know about anyone else, my sinuses are burning, so that's why I'm drinking too much water.
Oh, yeah. Allergies are insane.
What time do I have to, because I know we're probably running to next screen. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we gave you longer because
Yeah, I
you
knew.
needed
that.
longer.
I just, because I mean, we can, if we're getting close, I can like move through these a little faster, but if we have till 11, we're good. Because I think there's like around 9 injects. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move your responses. All right, so it looks like we're pretty even on this one, except for option 4. So does anyone want to comment or have discussion on why we chose option 1, 2, or 3?
All these possible trucks sitting around that.
And I always try not to like be too scary with stuff because I'm very paranoid being insecurity as long as I have. But I mean, I've worked with clients where like if you can imagine if you have a bunch of tanks outside, have like fertilizer or chemicals, and someone screws with your supply chain. How many of someone very young like Tommy Boy? I love that scene where everything gets changed. You know, I mean, obviously it's a little different now. It's more computerized, but I mean, he did do that. That's kind of stuff like understanding. Like, what does that look like? Because if you had, you know, like, especially, like, for example, with Scott's, all of that stuff is highly combustible. And if someone wanted to do a terrorist attack, and you had all those sitting or production, I mean, the likeliness isn't super high, but if it did happen, it's catastrophic. So it's always really interesting depending on those components as well.
Connie, where does it show the confidence?
Once I reveal the options.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this is another thing you can do is you can actually on the back end. I didn't do this because I knew we'd have to finish this, but you can actually ask how confident people are with their responses too, which I think is a good measurement because if your C-suite say that we're confident on everything, but they gave weak answers, we know there's a disconnect. And so, what are we going to do to have that open dialogue? To make that more balanced. Okay, so I'm going to choose the legal and compliance. And so this one, they say it's an okay answer. All of these are priorities, so this presents a wicked problem. Just so you know, so if you see misspellings next to it, they use terminology. Wicked is something on the East Coast people always say. When I first heard it, I was like, what is that? So, If you can transfer oil by alternative means, it will help ease congestion, but will present other health and safety, security, and environmental risks. You also have a major unresolved cybersecurity issue in how and are now facing scrutiny for having failed to adequately report the cyber breach to the regulatory system. Following numerous high-profile oil disasters in recent years, the burden is rightly placed on private companies to prioritize. Probably the BP oil spill was probably the biggest thing that started to change some of these conversations. All right. And as you can see, this is kind of addressing different people. So now we're talking about communications and press. Public escalation of the incident has led to a noticeable decline in operational capacity, and the government intervention has attracted serious media attention. As a critical national infrastructure provider, every second there is a delay in transferring order costs thousands of dollars and exposes you to serious public and regulatory scrutiny. The majority of published articles focus on speculation causing an influence of public panic buying, yet some resources include statements from partners and suppliers referencing your previous stakeholder communications. And again, look what people did for toilet paper. And I know Nancy, you know, if you remember several years ago, there was a shortage of water was contaminated. I mean, people were getting in fights from gas stations were charging $100 for a piece of water, which the federal government actually went after them for doing that. But it's just interesting. We know, and we've seen it probably more than anything, how people react to things. So, reputation management at this point in the crisis is crucial. Revealing the seriousness of the ransomware incident is in a transparent way may yield negative public perception and accelerate the problem. However, refusing to keep the public informed can seriously damage your reputation in the long run. How do you manage the demand for further information from the press? And we kind of talked a little bit about this, like how quickly do you go to the press? When do you like maybe pause and see what is the best response to the press? So again, we talked a little bit about that. So we'll let people go. So another thing to think about, and some companies do this and some don't. So I actually had a friend that worked for a student government entity here in Columbus, and him and his coworkers were outside just talking about the incident that happened, and someone from the press walked by and went into the media and pretty much put everything they said.
Whoa.
He actually got fired, but I mean that's just, I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, he wasn't meaning harm, but that's another thing. Do you have a plan where if something happens, most big companies say no one can talk to the media other than this, but that's just something really with ransomware when they're doing tabletops, they're like obviously October security awareness month. That to me is a security awareness thing because people are talking. I mean, how many times have you been in a restaurant and some your boss walks in the restaurant or someone you know or a competitor or whatever? So just being really careful because everything is recordable at this point in today's world. And in Ohio, only one person needs to know that you're being recorded. So just keep that in mind too. All right. All right, it looks like we have a few option 1, a few option 2, and the majority option 4. So does anyone want to talk about why they choose option 1 or 2? And here's the thing, if someone is convincing enough that we all change your mind, I can pick a different option. So sometimes that does happen. But again, it's really to open that dialogue and communication groups.
Main thing, I'm sorry, go.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
So I did pick option 4, but I was really between 2. I feel like this is another one like this.
Yeah.
Just probably what I would really combo with both. But I remember during a conversation about crisis communications at TRI, there was some stat, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but the sentiment was that if the public perceives that the company is being good-hearted, essentially, or like morally correct, even if things get worse, the ransomware event, they're more likely to be supported.
The biggest concern you have is trust, because, you know, I don't know about you guys, but no matter what side of the fence you're on, like, I just see how one particular topic can be spent in so many different ways. And so that's part of the problem, is that you could do everything that's right, but if the press spins it and like gives you all this negative press, it may or may be beneficial. And that's where it's so really dependent on the organization. And if you're heavily federally regulated, especially like NERC, which is that obviously, if we've seen it, I mean, I don't know how many people lost power this summer. Like, I lost it for 2 days, and I'm like, it's 2022, and we're not in a remote country. Like, what is going on? Like, and obviously there were some failures. Look what the press did to AP on that. I mean, they tore them apart. So, I mean, they're going to bounce back because we don't really have anyone else we can go to in some cases. But it's super interesting how everything kind of resonates with different people. Okay. So, which is interesting. They, and again, this is based on the scenario that happened with them. So during an incident of this magnitude, which involves so many external stakeholders, information is going to leak, is what we kind of talked about it. In the crisis, Colonial suffered several people close to the incident began speaking to the press. Transparency, therefore, is transfer the best course of action. You need to take control of the narrative rather than react to news as it emerges. Another key concern is preventing panic buying of gas, oil, and transparency and reassurance will help alleviate this. So, and we kind of just talked about all of that, where sometimes the upfront isn't necessarily the problem. And if you think about, not that I keep trying to bring COVID up, but I think one of the reasons why there was so much panic, who was pushing that narrative? The news. And so people started overreacting because they didn't think you're going to be able to get toilet paper. And like, I think it's fine to have some backups, but how many people, do we need 40 cases of toilet paper? 2 people probably not. You probably never go through all of it, but it's, just saying. So it's just one of those things. So, all right. So inject 6, supply and demand. The incident has escalated to national news and images of mile-long queues at gas stations whip up public frenzy. In response, the EPA and the Department of Transportation have temporarily eased various summer fuel restrictions, permitting greater quantities of oil to be transported by road and air as an emergency measure. The U.S. government has also issued an executive order on cybersecurity mandating that national and weatherproof providers and suppliers attain new standards of threat monitoring, detection, incident response planning, and supply chain security. The eyes of the world are on Providence. Although the easing of transport restrictions will help, the COVID-19 pandemic is preventing several haulage companies from operating at full capacity due to a lack of available drivers at such a short notice. Providence Pipelines technicians have managed to start recovering lateral pipelines within their infrastructure network, restoring some similar lines to full operation. This temporarily addresses the direct supply to local areas, but does little to address the overall supply issue. Operations are underway to contract more drivers to take advantage of the extra road transport capacity brought about by the emergency legislation. The question now is how Providence can most effectively distribute the oil through its emergency transport network. Neighboring states make for shorter transport time, but if supplies to the major airports reestablished, a number of strategic risks around international flight delays could be mitigated. What is your top priority? So I didn't know this. My husband actually used to work for TSA, and he said most of the time, one of the reasons why they started charging for luggage is a lot of times the cargo underneath is for retail. There's like lots of stuff that's underneath there for distribution globally. So, and we also see, like, I know, like with the hurricanes, I think AEP sent like 500 trucks down there. So we know we have some of these in process, but now we have to get beyond just the human perspective of people. And again, that process of technology is really important Because if we're dealing with these kinds of things on one side of the house, we have less on the other.
Someone, across the board. I want to ask.
And see, what I love about this is like I kind of overhear some of the conversations, and what's great about it is you're all talking. This is what I because if no one talks, how do you learn? How do you learn? How do you? I mean, let's face it. I mean, we all think we're smart people, but I know what my strengths and weaknesses are, and so I want to build myself around a team that we can best team possible. And so this is really about really kind of putting that together and making sure you have the right players involved. Did everyone vote that wanted to? All right.
Yeah.
So we have number 1 and 3 is 22%, option 2 is 11, and then 44% chose option 4. Anyone want to give their perspective on this?
I was saying it's that classic, what do you want? Do you want time? Do you want money? Or do you want quality, right? Like you can't have all. So I guess, I mean, I went with 4 just because, in the long run, that's fine. My other option was potentially going to be bring in the most money, which is, I think, option 2, just because
And like I
we
think,
don't have a company to run. If we don't have
and I think this is kind of hard too, because like with some of the supply issues, like the Walmarts, Kroger's that are huge buyers of all these products. But like we also saw like payment protection loans for small businesses. I have so many friends that the big banks never call them back. And a lot of people don't know about 62% of all Americans are small businesses. And they employ between 40 and 2%. So small business scale in this country, we're kind of screwed as an industry. So sometimes logically it's like, oh, give it to distributors, but you saw it with cars, some of the small dealerships have to close. And still today, like I don't know, a lot of car that you go to a lot, and there's still pretty empty. So there's just so many factors that kind of influence why you make the decision to do. All right, so this was an open answer, and as you can see, that how it's mentioned, like that, see how that graph's kind of going up and down based on the responses. So there are various challenges here, including speed versus equity of fuel distribution. We kind of just said that. It's always critical to consider your regulatory requirements, for instance, U.S. oil and gas laws and regulations 2021, and then sometimes depending on what state you are in, has to do this as well. In contrast, regarding oil transportation, the Interstate Commerce Act established oil pipelines as common carriers. Oil pipelines must provide transportation service to any party that reasonably requests such service, even if capacity is constrained. Where constraints exist, pipelines are required to tell or reduce the amount of oil transported by existing customers to create capacity to transport oil of a customer whose request would otherwise be denied due to capacity. And when you kind of think about this, it could be development where you could impact oil potentially in a larger area, just based on some metrics. According to legislation, you must make efforts to distribute limited supplies to all customers. This is a critical constraint for Providence pipeline to consider. It would benefit the organization to work with the government on some temporary exceptions for crisis situations. It is not an issue that can simply be ensured internally without wider government. So we kind of talked about a lot of those reasons. Okay. So another crisis. With the ongoing restoration of data from backups, the pressure on Providence pipeline has eased. One of the 4 primary pipelines and a selection of lateral pipelines are now back up and running. In addition to the emergency legislation passed to enable air transport of oil, more customers are being served and the backlog of oil slowly being managed. It's not perfect, but it's a start. However, there's still the major threat to think about, and you have been painted as a soft target to potential optimistic threat actors. So remember when I said like you get it right away? That's public knowledge. So will X, Y, Z other company do the same thing to you? Your stock has received an alert informing you that the primary Providence Pipelines website has gone offline. Navigating to the company website returns on HTTP 503 services unavailable message. Public attention has already been drawn to the error on social media and picked up by themselves. Based on this information available, what could be the cause of the site going down? Does this sound like a really fun day for this?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where I was talking about, sometimes what we see is, even if you pay the ransomware, it doesn't follow the system either. And it's usually nothing. I think when there is a crisis, are you looking at potentially a denial of service because everyone's going to your website? I mean, like I know in retail, they might normally use, for example, 100 servers, but during Black Friday and all the other specials, they have to go 200, 300, maybe 1,000. So understanding what that looks like. So that's always an interesting concept as well. Maybe this is a little hard because you don't have all the data points of the organization that you would really have. Oh, I didn't. That's right. So it looks like we have option 1 and 2, 25, actually all 4. So I've never seen that hardly ever. So you guys are completely divided for like equally. So so this one, you guys are gonna let me know which one we should pick because it's 100% even. So does anyone want to talk about why they chose one of these options, and then you guys can let me know which one you want me to reveal.
Number 4 because it's caught in.
Yeah, I
Also pick color. I know.
But can you imagine, like, I think we talked about this a lot, where I feel like a lot of security people are not very good at talking about their business. And ransomware is now become critical because, again, when I asked if any of you could write a check for 24 million, not one of you raised your hand. Maybe you weren't brave enough to raise your hand, you don't have to do that. But I also, I mean, it's just one of those things where if you don't understand, I mean, I ask about IT people all the time, like if all your systems went down, what were your top systems to bring up? Most of the time they look at me, I ask that question to the CEO and they rattle that off. Like, I mean, it's almost immediately. So that's where like, IT may decide to shut things down, but that may cost someone's job if they don't talk to the business because we kind of make some decisions somewhat in a vacuum of what's in our environment, but we don't know the entire environment. So it's definitely one of those. So
IT thinks that.
we have no egos at all. In IT.
Oh, no egos at all.
So is there one that you guys want me to choose?
Say flip a coin.
Okay, really quick, five, hands raised, number one. Alright, so we got three, number two. Okay, number three. Okay, number four, is there four? Yeah. Okay, it looks like most people raised three, so we'll pick that one. Weak answer. So once a company is shown to be vulnerable by one group, it's common for other groups of hackers to try to get into the action. However, without any information on what's caused the outage in the scenario, it's safest to experience a continuation of dark side of attack. The RAS group has been known to deface company websites when a ransomware has not been paid in the past to cause further damage. So when I talked about double and triple and quadruple extortion, these are the types of things that they use to pay ransomware. Colonial's technical team may have taken the website down from the inside to prevent any damage. In the same way, they have opted to turn off the operational network at the start of this exercise to halt the spread of the attack. However, a member of the CMT in this scenario would have been involved in this place. And you can see, like, honestly, sometimes when there's a crisis, people forget to talk to each other because they want to, everyone's trying to do the right thing, but do the right thing, and your mind may not be able to do the right thing.
So it's just a question based upon like my lack of understanding, I think, but so there have been a lot of updates that have been pushed out to the key stakeholders, media. We've got a couple of public statements that have been issued in this regard, right? Where are people accessing, where do folks typically access that information? If I'm a customer of this pipeline, the first place that I think to go is either the direct media contact or to the website for some type of, information. So just curious about like how that typically comes out, if there is anything.
I've seen some companies where they almost do a call center, like a network operations center or security operations center. But again, you just put anyone on that, you're going to have to figure out like part of your plan to train crisis scenarios with your team. Because the last thing you want to do is put a bunch of people that actually hate your company or they don't give a shit, quite frankly, excuse my language. But I mean, so it's really crucial on who would do that because that message would just be blown up. So I have seen some companies do that. And as far as like storing the data, I've seen companies use like encrypted text messaging, so everything's containerized. And then obviously legal counsel is part of that, so they have going on. But I mean, I feel like companies are kind of struggling with what is to fix. We were just talking earlier this morning where I have a lot of my bigger clients asking me to put together like a credit card size where all the main point of contacts are on. And then on the back, what are the first 3 steps we need to do in our communication process? Because, you think about like, what if cell phones, are down, and depending on the technology you have, if your whole network's down, you may or may not have access to email. And do you want people to Gmail? Because what happens is we accidentally use Gmail when we're supposed to be using it work. So those are the types of scenarios you have to think about and consider. And I would also say, when you're developing these plans, they have to be reasonable and actionable. I mean, if they're 1,000 pages, I mean, no one's going to want that. You can't. So that's why practicing, I think, is really more important because it almost becomes part of your routine. And, you're not going to second guess yourself or doubt some of your answers potentially, but if you practice and you think about when you're kids, normally our parents are like, if the house starts on fire here, it's kind of the same thing. And so if you never talk about it to your kids, know what to do, probably not. Okay. So root cause analysis, it's been 3 weeks since the initial attack and the oil transport is back to over 90% of normal operational capacity. Fuel supply, distribution, and cash flow pressures are beginning to ease. A major root cause analysis investigation is underway involving forensics, threat hunting, and cyber defense tools. It's critical the root cause of the network breach is identified and plugged, especially when considering the high-profile nature of the attack. In addition to the RCA liability assessment for my migrating larger selections of Providence network to the cloud is nearing completion. An interim forensics report suggests that hackers used a cobalt strike with available C2 profile and artifact to test Providence countermeasures in the ReynCon phase of the attack, before using Bloodhound to identify the criminal path to obtain admin access to the customer systems. Before the RCA is completed, a decision is required on how the results of the review will be shared with external stakeholders. The options are straightforward, but with potential consequences of each are less clear. Providence reputation and share price have already taken damage, so getting this communication right will be key. So what strategy will we choose? So do you think this is a little harder than what you probably initially thought? Do you like almost sometimes second guess your decision, like, oh, that was fun, that was the best answer. Or sometimes you're like, wow, I was really right. I actually chose the easy answer. So
I think it's interesting that you can make a case for a lot of different things, and depending on who you're talking to, you may or may not be overlapping in like your rationale. Right. So I know there's like best and weak and optimal, but depending on your intention and why you did it, I think there's something to really be gained in the conversation, like trying to get your point across. Let's see where you're coming from.
and that's what happened a lot of times. So when I've done this for like the C-suite and board of directors for companies, it's very funny how the legal is very set in what they want to do. The marketing and communications people have another than the CEO and the CIO. Like what I love about it though is once they all talk about it, they all had the same intent of how they got there was different. And so I think that's where it's kind of cool where you're able to have those open dialogues. So at least those conversations are going versus never having them. All right, anything else? All right. 77%. I'm gonna go, if everyone's, I want to go ahead and just go through this so we can kind of see how it ends. Because I know we're getting about 15 minutes. So this one was an okay answer. We are seeing an ever increasing reputational burden on private organizations to report publicly on cybersecurity incidents. And our hyper-connected world, and new standard has been set by organizations when it comes to sharing information about cyber capabilities and lessons learned in responding to a major cyber event. Full transparency is not only what the public and regulators expect, but also provides Providence Piloting the opportunity to influence the cyber resiliency policy debate. So if you guys are following me, I feel like there's a ton of new regulations coming out. You know, if you're a global company, it's like there's so much stuff. And do you like figure out where your risks are? Like, you know, California and Nevada have really strict privacy rules. If you followed their rules for the whole entire United States, it would probably cost too much money. So it's not always reasonable to take the most strict. Some companies do, but they sometimes go blind, and they kind of handle some of the other states as off. But there's so much federal mandates. I think it's on the last for approval. Any publicly traded company will potentially have to have a cybersecurity risk report directors, which I think is a good start. But it'll be interesting for those people. Will it be the CISO or chief security officer? Who will it be? In some cases, it's probably going to be external people, but it's really hard to figure out. So that's what it happens. And then on the back end, there's a bunch of reports. So it'll tell where the trends are. And I have to run a bunch of things. I don't have enough time, but this is kind of the graph. And then you can also tell this particular one, we don't know who is picking one, but there's other options where you can do training. So I have one of my clients that everybody seems to be hiring a lot in the resiliency side of the house. So they can assign training to them and do exercises to get them up to speed for the rest of the team. And that's more of a customization one that's based on the organization. And so there's a lot of really good information. So anybody have any questions or comments? Was this useful?
I guess on that very last answer, I understand the concept of the whole full disclosure, and this is exactly what happened, and this is how we handled it. But I guess my only concern with that is that if you've already now shown that you are vulnerable, obviously, and then you're saying, hey, these are all the steps we took to handle it. Like, can somebody use that and be like, oh, they're going to do this next, like that, and then use that as a
Yeah, I think the purpose of some of this is for them to work with some of the federal agencies to provide more of a framework that companies can use. So I've been seeing that a lot. I mean, there's obviously, that's where I also think attorneys are really important because they're making stuff that you will absolutely not disclose. And when you have someone that can frequently fight that, quite frankly, I mean, what is full disclosure? Everyone will agree on that. And so I also think there are some things that the public generally should not know. They should understand. Because I don't know if you guys remember back in the day, like all the blueprints for like facilities, like weapons facilities used to be on the finance. And then you had military people that put the black marker on it, people kind of layers and everything. I mean, so it's just like it never stops. And I just think you have to figure out with the organization like what your level of risk is and what risks are you willing to accept. I mean, I do feel probably being as open with regulators, that is probably going to be more useful. But again, I would also have conversations with an attorney to make sure you're not, because you don't have to necessarily lie. I'm not asking you have to lie, but do you have to tell them everything? I mean, that's kind of a personal conversation and aligned with business. Like you guys probably have all heard about the Uber CISO. And I think it's interesting how everyone's attacking this person, but from what I've read, their legal counsel and the C-suite told them not to do it. So if you're the breadwinner of your family and I'm sorry, to disclose. And so, you may be in a position where you can't put yourself in that position. That's why I think never needs to fine, to be honest. I would never lie for anybody. That's just who I am to the core. And I'm not saying sisters want to lie, but I mean, there's so many other alternative things going on that could cause people to take bad decisions. And it seems like they're just going after him. They're not going after anyone else there. So it's